Joyce Raimondo, and this program is being hosted by the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center, a national landmark in East Hampton. I'm the education coordinator, and we have our special guest speaker today, Carl Scorza, who's going to share his art and also his process that combines technology and art and painting. So for those of you who are not familiar with the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center, I'm just going to show 3 or 4 quick images just to put this in the context of the museum and also the area where we live. Carl lives right down the street from the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center. And I understand you've also been a docent.
I was a docent there in the 90s.
Okay, a docent is a person who guides tours. So he has a long-standing history with the museum, but in particular also with the incredible beauty of the area in East Hampton called the Springs. So let me just show a few images. So here is the Barn Studio where Jackson Pollock and Lee made their abstract expressionist art. And you can visit the site in person with a guided tour. So you have to make an appointment, go to pkhouse.org to visit the museum. You can also go to our education page to see other virtual programs that we offer. And we have all sorts of new kinds of music events coming up this summer as well. So check out the website to see what's new. We have a new director, Matthew Ward, so we have all sorts of new programs. And here's Pollock in his studio doing his famous drip painting technique. Pollock was not painting from observation, as Carl, you'll see, is, but he was inspired by nature and the beautiful surroundings of the East End. Same with Lee. Lee also, in her particular paintings, you often actually see images that are more natural images like flowers or seeds, but they're abstracted. And here is a view of our spectacular yard, which is the property where these 2 great artists lived. And that water body way in the distance is Accabonac Creek. That's a creek that goes all the way out. You could take a boat all the way to the end to Montauk. So the reason so many artists settle out here is because of all the water that surrounds the area, makes the light remarkably vibrant. And you're going to see today in Carl's work how he is a master at capturing light and also light reflections, not only in the landscape, but also in still lifes and buildings and other aspects, which he'll talk about. So we do also have the historic house, which has changing exhibitions. So Carl, before you start your actual presentation, would you like to say a few words about your process? This is Carl Scorza.
Thank you. And I want to thank you for inviting me. I was a docent here. I was a friend of Roger Wilcox, who was close to Pollock. And when the Stony Brook took over the building and made it a museum, Roger really encouraged me to volunteer. And I met Helen Harrison, and she trained me to be a docent, and it was a wonderful experience.
It is.
It really was a wonderful experience. I've met a lot of wonderful people. I learned an awful lot about the era, about the place, the other artists. It was terrific. So I really appreciate the fact that you invited me.
You're coming full circle a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Yes. And as I said, also, Carl lives down the street. His studio's down the street, and he also lives part-time with his wife, Pat, in Manhattan as well.
This is just the other side of the body of water that Jackson Pollock's home is at. This is Accabonac Harbor. I set up on Girard Drive. And at this point, I made this actually about the same time that I was a docent. And at this point, I had been a plein air painter for 15 or so years, maybe more. I had been influenced by Fairfield Porter and his essays on the relationship between abstraction and realism, working from life. I read his essays, particularly the foreword by Rackstraw Downs. And he talked about painting perceptually. I went out and bought a French painting easel, and I thought everything was decided for me. And again, I mentioned this, I did this sometime in the mid-90s. It's from Girard Drive. But as a perceptual painter, I was working really with local color. I was getting my color choices from the natural environment. And the geometry, maybe I fooled around with a little bit, the composition. And in this particular thing, I'm focused on the perceived sense of depth. And I'm playing with the telephone poles receding into the distance. You put a small recognizable object near the edge, and everybody associates that with distance. And it was, it's a learning experience playing. Looking back on it, I find the real value was that it's a learning experience. Nature has an unlimited amount of things that it can show you, that you can work with, that you can inspire your creativity. And this area, Accabonac, Girard Drive, Springs in general, the Bay, it's just very beautiful. It's easy to be inspired. And I particularly like the way these C shapes, these scallops move back into the distance. And then there's this little reflections back here, working in conjunction with this, and then counterpointed by the contrails going into the clouds. And it gives you a sense of place. And it's a straightforward painting. I'm set up with a French painting. This is a fair size painting. I think it's 36 by 72. So I set up with 2 French painting easels. The other thing I liked about Girard Drive is that, what's that?
You just have to let people in from time
Okay,
to time.
sorry. Is that I could find a place to park the car, take my equipment out, and I'm not hiking in, like walking dune or someplace. And I made a lot of paintings like this over a period of many years. We can go to the next one. This is another view of Accabonac Harbor. Instead of Girard Drive, I'm set up on Springs Fireplace Road. And again, I could pull off right to the side of the road. I get my French painting easel out. I could begin to fool around with choices of the composition. And it was a very enjoyable, very informative, very educational way to paint. And it's very organic also, because you're in nature and you're working from nature. It's solid. I think it's, regardless of how you ultimately decide to paint, I think painting plein air is really important. It trains your eye. It gives you a background, like in what you do and how it affects the imagery, and you always have this benchmark of, the natural environment. But as time went by, after 15 or so years, I wanted to include the urban environment. Like you mentioned, I was born in Manhattan. I lived half my life in Manhattan. And I just felt like it was time to add that. And I had I was inspired by Monet's painting the Cathedral of Ramey. He rented a room across from the cathedral, and he painted the building every different times a day. And by luck, about this time, I met some people who were interested in making use of underutilized Manhattan office space. And myself and some people from Con Edison, Lisa Fregan, my wife Pat Ricciardi, we pitched the idea to the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council of giving us space. And fortunately, a board member of LMCC was his VP Director of Real Estate for the Port Authority. And she gave us space on the 91st floor of the World Trade Center.
Wow.
Yeah, it was great. It was really great. This is the view from the 91st floor of the North Tower of the Old World Trade Center, looking down on the West Side Highway, the Hudson River. I don't know if you make out that black box, that's the aerator for one of the tunnels. And you see him looking across at a helicopter because we're so high up. And it was really, a great time. Graham Nixon, the dean of the New York Studio School, he curated what artists would get the space. There were 20 of us, 19 or 20. And it was a good mix of one of my people I admire is Raxford Downs. I mentioned him earlier. He and I were set up next to each other, looking out the window and, painting the urban environment. And I was there for a year.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Hang on one second. I want to just double check that this is being recorded, because when the share is on, it doesn't show. I just want to double check. Sorry, everybody. Yes, it is. Okay. Sorry about that. Sorry to interrupt you. That would be a shame.
Let me just go. One thing this is one of the first paintings that I did while I was there. And it's very much a plein air painting, even though I'm inside the building. I'm looking out at the natural landscape, as natural as a city gets. And it's now owned by the Historical Society of New York Historical Society. One of the curators came through and liked the idea of the program and wanted some things for the collection. So I'm very proud of that. And this, at the time, I was still working full time. So a lot of my paintings are night scenes. I would get there, you know, it was through the winter. So I would get there at 3 or 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock. And my idea was to paint, I finish a painting in a day. You know, my few hours there, I would do something. I did a lot of paintings. This is about, I don't know, 12 by 14 or maybe a little large, I'm not sure. And I'm beginning to experiment in this, not so much with local color, but I'm beginning to experiment with mark making. There were some very talented artists there. Lois Dodd was in the program, Yvonne Jacquet, Raxter I mentioned, Jolene Dusenberry, Richard Haas, and they were, you know, they were inspiring, and they inspired, you know, they challenged me to be more aggressive in how I handled paint. They also did a lot of drawing, and it wasn't drawing in order to transfer to the canvas. It was drawing as a plan. And then you didn't like fill in the drawing with color. You just got an idea from the drawing and you went on and made the painting. And so the painting has a drawing element to it. And that gives it a very spontaneous, spur of the moment, plein air feeling in the brush mark. So you can see I'm contemplating what I'm going to deal with here. These are the avenues, there's the horizon. I'm making some marks about the Chrysler Building and some other things. And then I would go on to make this painting. And that's the Hudson River on the left side of the painting, the East River. And you can see there's sort of like an imaginary X going through it, holding the geometry. The two rivers sort of embracing the island. It's the Bronx out off into in that distance view. And this is the painting I made from that plan.
Wow.
And it's 20 by 60. It's a fair sized painting.
This painting is so detailed.
It actually really isn't that detailed. When because it's a large painting, and then you see it on a small screen, it gets denser. It appears more detailed. Each of like the edge of this building here is a single mark, and you know, and on and on. Each of those colors is more like a mark when you see the actual painting.
No, I understand that, but you actually did paint the actual buildings.
Yes.
Which is
yes.
remarkable. This takes so much concentration.
Well, yeah, well, that's the idea of the plan. Like if you remember the way the avenues, and this gives you a geometric net to hold the thing together. It's this one here.
And how long did this painting take?
You know, it's hard to say. And also it's hard to assign the time to it because there's so much planning. There's a bunch of little paintings that I did that were like just the middle section. There's a bunch of little paintings that I did that are really just like where the UN building is. And there's like the one I showed you at first, where it's the Hudson River. So you begin to become informed. It's not just perception. It's not just looking at the landscape. It's learning the landscape, understanding the landscape, and then reevaluating that and developing the thinking about how you feel about it. And this one is where I really feel like the Manhattan is being embraced by the rivers. Then I'll show you another one. This is the same view at night. And I learned this from Raxter. He had a morning painting, he had an afternoon painting, he had a late afternoon painting. I wasn't as organized as he was, certainly not at that time. But this is the same view, similar composition, similar size. It's what I came later to learn is called a triple square. It's about 20 inches high and about 60 inches long. So it's, you know, the length is 3 times the height, it's a triple square. But it's basically the same composition, but it's at night. So it's a whole different chromatic structure. Yeah, it was great. It was great being there. And it was remarkable too, because I get out of the subway on the street level and it'd be cloudy. And I get up to the 91st floor and I was above the clouds. So I'd see the buildings sticking up out of the clouds. It was really remarkable. Let me go on to something else. Well, anyway, after the World Trade Center, that my time in the World Trade Center was a year. I got to know Graham Nixon. He liked my work. He gave me a scholarship. So for the next 4 years, all I did was student work. And I'm going to spare you showing you that work. It was student work.
When that was at the New York Studio
I was at the
School?
New York Studio
Mhm.
School, right? He was the dean of it, and I was there for 4 years.
Can you tell people a little bit about the studio school and like what?
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. It's a Hans Hofmann-based school,
Mhm,
and it was founded by Mercedes Manor, who was a close friend of Jackson Pollock. She founded it on, and she studied extensively with Hans Hofmann. So her principles were Hans Hofmann principles. So it does sort of feed into that whole, reevaluation of what it meant to be a painter, what the role of realism, the role of perception. I think one of the things that's overlooked is that there was always a model in the class. We abstracted from something. And the challenge was always the model. I have a wonderful drawing of Mercy's Manor, and it's a model in a typical classroom setup, bunch of students around, looking at the model and working for that. But it's a very abstract painting. It was a great experience. And then what happened next for me was that in the summertime, between years, I would come back out here and I wanted to continue being a plein air painter, but I wanted to include the figure in the whole process. I was working from the figure, but I didn't want to do it as an anatomy challenge. I wanted to do it in its perceptual way, the way I was being taught at the New York Studio School. So that's why the figures in the paintings are so notational. I would go to the beach because I thought, well, that's where there'll be people there and they'll be in bathing suits, and they would present themselves. And as they did, I would paint them spontaneously. And again, like I was working in the World Trade Center, I wanted to finish each painting in the day that I started it. Maybe I would take it home and do some touch-ups or something. But this woman here on the right, she walked past me, and maybe I painted the skirt, and maybe the shirt is from somebody else as they pass me by, and whatever looked like the hair. So it has a kind of like casual, abstract, almost painterly, but very spontaneous plein air feeling, but it has people in it. So I'll show you another one.
Excuse me, I have to
Sure.
let somebody in here.
By all means. And this is just another example. Set up on the beach. It's a little, this one's a little bit, a little out of control. Like the scale of the figures is a little, one of the figures looks a little too big, one of the figures looks a little small, but that's because I'm painting them as they arrive and I have minutes to do each one. And I want to keep that energy in the painting. I'm still thinking as a plein air painter.
Are these oil paintings?
They're all oil paintings. All my paintings are oil paintings.
Wow.
And then drawing again is I had, when I was a plein air painter, I very rarely did drawings. But at the school and from my experience in the World Trade Center, drawing is integral. It's the thinking. It's the first demonstration between myself, my thinking, and the source of inspiration. It's not like an outline drawing that I'm gonna fill in later, but it's sort of like a plan. This is my first reaction to the experience, and then I'll carry that experience into the painting. And like in this case, I wanted those lifeguard stands to stand out because they're really white. And so I realized that the best thing is the blank canvas surrounded by a darker color. And then this drawing becomes this painting.
Very nice.
Yeah, and it's spontaneous. It's demonstrative marks, it's plein air experience. It looks like, it shares the experience without getting into too much descriptiveness. But I still want to do larger figures, and that's a challenge. And so I started using photographs. I would paint the background of this painting, the lifeguard stand, the smaller figures, and then the dog and the three larger figures were actually painted from photographs. I really struggled with a lifelike, logical human figure painted spontaneously. So I'm combining now, and also digital cameras are starting to be commonplace. So I could take pictures, go home, print out the image, on ordinary paper, put 4 or 5 images on 8.5 by 11, hang them in the studio, paint from memory the beach scene, and then looking at the photographs, paint the figures in. And that became my process. And then I want to expand on that. Well, this is another example that the water, where the horizon is imagined. The figure is from a photograph that I captured of the surfer. And I always like surfing because I find them sort of a metaphor for the artist's experience. There's an individual on his own, dealing with the elements as they present themselves and trying to do something enjoyable, and beautiful. It's a metaphor. But this is where I was going with the figure. And none of these figures are from the same photograph, but about half of them are from photographs. And the other half, the ones that are further away or the ones in a more congested place, are, from memory or from other paintings.
This, yeah, this reminds me, were you inspired a little bit by George Seurat?
Oh, yes, very much. Yeah. The day in the park. And I thought about him a lot, but not so much for the pointillism. He's pointillism, right? Yeah, not so much for the pointillism, but the way he arranged people it's a day in the park or a Sunday in the park. It's in Chicago.
Yeah,
I've seen
yeah.
it. It's an amazing thing.
Yeah, it's an icon.
And the spacing and like where the heads are, where the feet are, and how that creates a sort of like musical relationship as the eye goes from one person. Some people are close, some people farther away, and you move from one to the other. I'm so glad you mentioned it, because I'm going to show you another. Well, this is a drawing. The figure is like almost full size, and now I'm beginning to feel comfortable with the figure. And it's painted from a collection of photographs. It's not painted, I'm sorry. It's a charcoal drawing. It's from a collection of photographs. Oh, I missed the painting here. What happened?
Oh, maybe I put him out of order.
Uh,
Okay, just keep going and then you can always go back to them.
Oh, well, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a painting that was missing. But anyway,
Do you want, excuse me, Carl, do you want to go back to the beach? There's a painting that's missing?
yeah.
Oh, I don't know.
All right, don't worry about it.
But now this is a new section?
This is a different era.
Okay.
Okay, I finished school. I missed being out here, but then an opportunity came to paint from Governor's Island. Is this the first one in the series? Let me just go back, yeah. I wonder what happened. Let me just, nope.
Do you want me to try to?
No,
find it? Okay.
I'm letting myself get distracted. I shouldn't. In 2005, a similar opportunity presented itself to paint cityscapes. The National Park Service became part of New York City on Governor's Island. And this is the view from Governor's Island looking at the city. And it was because of 9/11, I don't want to dwell on that too much, but I wanted to sort of like return to that motif, to that collection of things. And it was also an opportunity to run an educational program. The New York Studio School and the National Academy, I managed the program with the Park Service to bring classes out to Governor's Island.
Oh.
And it was really fun because nobody else was on the island at the time. There was the ferry operators, a couple of firemen, 3 or 4 firemen, a half dozen or so people working for the government, and 20 or so artists. It was great. It was great. We all knew each other. Yeah, it was fun because we all had to take the same ferry. And it was only 1 in the morning, 1 at the end of the day. So we all had to get on and off the island at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we all got to know each other. Yeah, it was fun. Because, the city people say, oh, so you're an artist, and what do you do? How do you manage that? It was good. It was interesting. But anyway, this is a charcoal sketch that I did plein air. It's 17 by 51, which is a triple square. And I did it looking at the motif. And then, oh, no, that's wrong way. Sorry. Okay. This is a 30 by 90 that I did in the studio from the first charcoal sketch. And it allowed me, but be able to paint again, like in the other things I paint. I do a lot of paintings and I really get to know it. So then taking that material into the studio, I can really indulge in a large drawing. This is 7.5 feet. And then this is a 24 by 48. And this is really an oil sketch. I'm familiarizing myself with it. And this is the whole harbor. That's Jersey on the left side. That I think that's Goldman Sachs building, the tall building on the left side. Then there's like a miniature version of the Manhattan skyline. There's a little miniature Staten Island ferry. You see a glimpse of the Brooklyn Bridge. And I'm becoming more apocryphal with the clouds and the color. I'm putting pinks and purples in it. I'm getting away from that local color thing that I was captured as a plein air painter.
Mhm.
And again, this is the Hudson River, see the Staten Island Ferry, and I'm experimenting more with color. And this is a night scene of the same skyline. And it's interesting, it's more interesting to me, I guess, because I was never on Governor's Island at night. But because of my experience in the World Trade Center working, doing a lot of night scenes, I could borrow that palette and apply it to the same composition or a similar composition and create a late evening, twilight, or almost dark evening painting. And it's this this is an 8-foot painting. It's a 24 by 96. No, not 24. Yeah, 24 by 96. It's 4 square. And again, the weather is apocryphal. I was never at this is the sunrise coming up. I was never on Governor's Island at early in the morning. But the combination of working plein air
Mhm.
from life, then collecting photographs, and then organizing that and planning it made it possible to make these paintings, for me anyway. And then I began to miss East Hampton. And I left, it was 2007 now, and I've been teaching on Governor's Island and running the program rather. And so I wanted to come back out here, but I missed all those vertical forms.
Mhm.
And this collection of bottles, from friends coming by, and I really don't drink that much, as it implies here. But I always had a lot of bottles in the house. And so I set them up in the studio. And this actually is painted from life as a studio setup. And I call it Skyline Bottles because it was inspired because of I wanted to be back in East Hampton, but I still was sort of in that geometry, vertical lines, and like Surratt, the spacing between the bottles
Mhm.
and what colors are next to each other are really the thing that drive it. How high one bottle is, how far away is it from its neighbors, how far the bottom comes down. It creates a sort of like musicality to it.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, it's enjoyable. It's
Mhm.
enjoyable. So it's enjoyable to work out. And it also goes chromatically. Do you have light next to dark? You have green next to orange, blue next to red, etc. I mean,
Mhm.
I put the
Very
Tabasco
beautiful.
in because I wanted some red. I put the lemon in because I wanted some yellow. They go to another one. And then still life became something for me. I really started doing still life. And I think it's one of the things I'm going to return to, currently. I overindulged in the whole liquor thing. I wish I'd gotten other objects in there, but it's really fun. And it's also somewhat autobiographical because like the what is it? Black Seal rum, the bottle in the middle. It's very popular with sailors. It's a Brazilian rum. And at one time in my life, I did a lot of sailing. I don't anymore. That's
Mhm.
why the bottle's empty. I sort of like finished with that era of my
Mhm.
life. So it's a sort of like just again a poetic reference to personal experience. And it's also these are the things I like. This is the champagne is the champagne that we poured at our wedding. We have friends that lived in Portugal. It's there's
Mhm.
some reference to my experience.
Now, can I ask you a
Sure,
question, Carl? When you,
please.
with these paintings, one of the things that stands out when I've seen them in real life is the way you use the text as almost like a graphic element here and there.
Yes.
Now, how was it introducing that into the paintings? Can you
I,
tell us about that?
yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad you asked it because it's interesting. I found that with the labels, the bottles had more personality. The manufacturers really they have all kinds of focus groups and designers, how to present their product, how make it stand out on the shelf. And I when I made drawings, and I didn't put the labels in, it was kind of like a standard still life. When I started putting the labels in, the bottles came to life more. They had more personality. You're right. The way the one like particularly the way the green bottle, the port, flows into the red bottle behind
Mhm.
it, and then the curve of the underneath the seal on the next bottle, they all sort of like it adds to that flow around the face of the bottles from label to label.
Mhm.
Yeah, very astute. Good for you. Now I'll have to remember
No,
that.
they're so beautiful. I
Thank you.
love it.
Thank you. They're still life is like one thing about this is that like the first one I showed Skyline bottles, you get to arrange them. You don't have to arrange it like when you're working plein air and landscape, you have to like consciously force yourself to make that tree smaller or bigger or lighter or darker in order to, make the painting work chromatically or geometrically. In still life painting, you can do that on a tabletop and you can rearrange the bottles before you even start painting. And then I got into just the nature of colored glass and also conscious of that, the concept of shallow space, not having a artificial perspectival or atmospheric space, but having space that maintains the integrity of the surface of the canvas so that, you don't, so that each mark that makes up the different colors and shapes is not projected into an artificial deep space. And so I was playing in this still life with the idea of shallow space. And then this is something else. I do a lot of sunsets. East Hampton has a sunset culture. You and I many times and other friends of ours, we'll say, oh, let's meet at, Maidstone or the ocean, watch the sunset, and we'll get together for an hour or so. And I've always been drawn to that idea. And it's one of the things that Fairfield Porter mentioned, that one of the great challenges of painting something like a sunset or just the light is really part of the plein air challenge. And I've done a goodly number of them over the years. And talking about the sunset culture, I painted this at the end of Flagging Hole Road, Maidstone. So you can drive right up to the beach, you can park. Almost always, I go down on a Friday night, there's a very good chance I'm gonna meet friends of mine. And we just gather to watch the sunset. It's an East Hampton thing. And I also got into moonrise. Moonrise is equally spectacular, especially if you catch it a couple of days after the full moon, when it comes up at night, but it's still really big.
This is so beautiful. I did a program a few weeks ago called Ignite the Darkness about how artists do sometimes just show light piercing the darkness. And this is I think this is incredible, the colors and the abstraction of it as well.
Yeah, you really, when it's dark, when a subject is something that everybody recognizes as dark, it's really it's a lot of freedom in it. You really can run wild with it. Even in black and white, I'll show you something else. This is a charcoal of a moonrise, which as a charcoal, it really works. It's really, the way the very dark lines work against the mid-tone lines and how it makes the highlight so much brighter. I mean, that highlight is the blank paper, yet it seems so much brighter than any other part, of the paper by itself. It's interesting. I like working in black and white. It's essentially abstract, but it's also, it asks you to do things with less. And it's another sunset. Something else I do occasionally, like sunsets, I occasionally do birds. I think they're lovely, particularly egrets, the way their wingspan, they're kind of goofy when they're walking around looking for something, but once they take off, they're really just majestic and magical. I find it really beautiful. And egrets, they're very these are terns. They're very acrobatic. They fly really fast and they dive for little bait fish and they compete aggressively. And the aerial acrobatics are just a delight. It's really fun. This is just a pair of egrets. And then I like this. So we talked about process. These are quick sketches that I did looking at terms. It's, I look at the bird, I make a few marks, the bird's gone, and I go on to the next bird or the next moment. And I did a lot of them. And what I really wanted to do is do a large painting with a lot of birds, a real flock of birds. This is another one. He looks like a happy bird, doesn't he? But I couldn't get enough of them. So I built a dummy. This is a paper towel and paper Scotch tape, magic marker. Really and it's photographed in front of us. It's photographed in front of a sunset painting.
Wow.
So, but from this, I could do this painting.
Very good. Can you go back?
Yeah, sure. I wish we could show them both at the same time.
Okay, so there it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
And you see it's on a staff and I can push it around and tape it so it's different shape. And then
Yeah, that's remarkable how you translated that.
Well, it's also making the other drawings.
Yeah.
They go hand in hand. And the other thing I've learned by this time as a painter
It's beautiful.
is that the negative space, or what people will call the background, also reflects the shape of the bird.
Mhm.
And the shape of the bird is actually defined by repainting the background and, pushing on the shape of the bird, and then painting the bird again and pushing back on it. And
Mhm.
all the time, the mark making in the feathers and in the sky kind of reflect each other. So they work in tandem. It has that, what is referred to like the integrity of the surface.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. This is such a good example for the beginners, who are any beginners out there. If you notice, every brush stroke has a purpose.
Yeah,
Right?
they're not just filling in the background.
Mhm.
And then there's another one. This is the same bird, but it's, it's a different, I've twisted it around a little bit. And then from this, I can make this painting, this bird. And again, you see the way the background, it's a little glary, but actually it makes the brush mark more obvious. And this is on a larger painter. You can see some of the birds are still being worked on.
Mhm.
And then from all those drawings, I Xeroxed all the drawings, then I cut them out and I made a collage. And that, by shuffling them around, scotch taping down a foam core, I could create a flock of birds without have to redrawing every bird. And then I photographed this panel, this piece of foam core, and then I made maybe 20 or 30 cutouts on it. And I photographed it and I put it into Photoshop. And in Photoshop, I can put another layer in the water. I can paint the background in order to see the birds better. I can also play with the birds. The birds can be, I can make that without redoing the drawing, I can make the bird bigger, or I can make it darker. I can twist it around a little bit. I can flop it over. And so in Photoshop, I finished the composition. And then I made this is a 12 by 24 oil sketch
Wow.
of a composition of the birds. And you can see I didn't even stretch it. It's just tacked to the studio wall. And then looking at the collage, I make this quick painting. And then this is a 24 by 48. It's, 200% as big. And I can spend more time with each, really define the background, really see where I want to put the horizon line, what kind of colors I want to put into the horizon, into the birds. And this is a 24 by 48.
And excuse me, do you
Sure.
use a projector to
No.
enlarge it, or so you're doing it by eye, so to speak,
Yes.
from the collage? So it's interesting. You're first painting from observation, the birds from direct
Right.
observation.
Right.
And now you're actually painting from observation, using your sketch and your
Yes.
collage.
Yes. And I greatly prefer that and recommend it, because if you scale it up or use a projector, the temptation is not to be creative.
Yeah. Mhm.
The temptation is to follow the lines and paint what the projector is telling you to paint. And by it's a little bit more time consuming and a little bit more frustrating, but to paint by looking at something and then just by where you think it should be, you're compelled to be more creative, because you're always making decisions. And then when you come back to do the background or the waves or the shape of the birds, you sort of redefine that, and it just comes to life more.
Mhm.
Everything's more integrated, everything's locked together. And it just gives a greater sense of animation to the painting.
Mhm.
So what else we got? Oh, and this is something else. I do flowers again from time to time. This is an older painting, but it's the flowers in the lobby of the Metropolitan Museum. And every week they change them. And it's an almost endless source of, they do it about 50 times a year. They change the flowers. And I did this, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6, maybe 10 years ago. But I did this one more recently. They have these 4 creches where they put flowers in, and this is something I did more recently. And then from this one, I rearranged it in Photoshop. Well, I'm sorry, this is not the same one. These flowers are actually in the backyard of Rembrandt's home in Amsterdam. I was there for the tulip season, luckily, and in his backyard, the house is a museum. There's this gigantic flower pot with these huge tulips coming out of it. And from the way that the the architecture worked in the Metropolitan Museum floral, I thought I wanted to frame it some other similarly. And I got the idea of just putting a plein air frame because, I was once a plein air painter.
No, it's interesting. It makes it look more abstract in a sense.
In a sense, it also makes it more volumetric because by putting the flowers, some of them in front of the frame, you don't know really where the space is.
Mhm.
And then this one, the outline of the frame that outlines is actually a photograph printed on canvas. And then I painted on top of that, I painted the florals. They're somewhat rearranged from the previous painting I showed you that was completely painted, from the flowers in the Met.
And did you paint on top of the photo, the gold?
Yes,
Mhm.
where it was appropriate.
Mhm.
And this is something else that I'm experimenting with. This is a group of people, and it's part photograph, it's part painting, it's part print, like the boats are printed on the canvas, and the background is from another painting, but it's a photograph, and then it's highlighted and reworked. And these people were not from the same photograph; they're from a collection of photographs. So it's somewhat different process. I think of it more like drawing. But it's like this, it's more information there.
Now,
And
wait, could you go back to that one? Because I love this painting. It reminds me of two other paintings. One is Renoir's The Luncheon.
Yes,
And
yes.
it's interesting how you kind of also capture people. It's a little awkward.
Yeah,
Like she has her mouth in front of her,
her hand
in front of her mouth, and then like you wonder what that man back there, like what's in his hand, what is he looking like? They're all in the middle of doing something. With the conversation, the meal is partially eaten. It really reminds me of that painting. It's as if we're there, but it also makes me think of Van Gogh's the potato eaters, because the way you composed it, where they're sitting in a circle, but this is sort of the polar opposite, where this is a bit of decadence.
Yes.
And Van Gogh was really about the humble people who are the potato eaters, the workers, the farmers.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that? Was that a
Yes,
conscious awareness?
in fact, this was a painting that I wanted to make for probably 2 decades, but I never got the right people. I wanted it to be candid photographs. I wasn't gonna try and dummy it up like an art director. So I've taken probably hundreds of photographs of people eating at various restaurants. It never seemed to work out. But the contrast of my lifestyle, my experience, and the people in the potato eaters was something on my mind from all the years I've spent out in East Hampton. And how lucky we are. I mean, the potato eaters is all earth colors. There's one bulb or light source, not a bulb, it's a lantern in the middle of one light source. This is an outdoor scene. There's, luxury, sailing the yachts and motorboats and whatnot in the background. And you're indulging in, hamburgers, lobsters, whatever. The contrast really spoke to the contrast of the experience, East Hampton experience versus the hardscrabble life of the 19th century.
Mm-hmm. And yet you also have this girl in the front who we see the back of her head with almost like a glow around her, which is similar to Van Gogh as well. But in Van Gogh's painting, it's interesting. It's almost like the people are more connected, like looking at each other more. Here, they're not exactly making contact except for the two in the back. They're all kind of in their own world. I don't know if that was conscious or it just came out like that.
It just came out like that. I mean, it's interesting, what's conscious and what's unconscious, what's planned and what's not planned. As soon as I get an idea for a painting, I'm mainly interested in what are the color combinations? How am I going to compose this? What's the shape of it? How big the rectangle should be? And I lose sight of why I was emotionally attracted to the source of inspiration in the first place. But that's the artist's job. I mean, that's how, you go from an idea to a physical thing, pursuing plasticity, the idea, make the idea plastic. That's the way that I do it. I mean, other people may do it differently. And so there's a lot that I discover after the fact. Like you, I think it was you mentioned Renoir's The Boathouse.
Luncheon at the boathouse.
Luncheon at the boathouse, right. And I wasn't thinking about that, but it's more like that painting than Van Gogh's painting. But the source of inspiration was the contrast between Van Gogh's, what he was seeing and what I was experiencing.
Mhm.
Joey?
Excellent. Yeah,
Thank
thank
you,
you.
thank you. And this is, again, I'm still involved with still life. Oh, this is a similar still life, but it's an actual place. Uh, uh, Josephine Baker, grandchildren has a restaurant. It's a theater district, and I frequently stop there on the way to the theater. Elements of it are apocryphal. The money, the umbrellas, the dancing figure. I want to reference a dancer, but that's actually a Greek dancer. And it's part of that whole bottles, liquor, entertainment thing that I was into for a while. And then this is another example of that shallow space, approaching recognizable objects, but displaying them in visually a shallow space,
Mhm.
paying more attention to, if you sort of painting, you see that it's really blobs of color, demonstrative marks. It's not an artificial space. It's a two-dimensional surface.
Yeah, and I can see in this one how like the little caps of the bottles almost make like a syncopated rhythm.
Yes, that's a big thing. That's a
Yeah.
big thing with me, yeah.
And then the verticals, like you could picture them going up and down,
Mhm.
like some kind of musical instrument or something. Yeah,
Yeah,
beautiful.
thank you. Thank you. Do we have any more? Oh, these are drawings I'm doing. And this is, I wanted I want to do still lifes, but I don't want to do any more liquor bottles.
Okay,
I think we're coming to the end.
that's
And this
challenging.
is sort of like an appropriate
Uh-huh.
goodbye.
Thank you, Carl
Thank you.
Scorza. Thank you so much. I have so much respect for your work, really.
Thank you, really.
I learned so much. I've known Carl for years,
Yeah,
and I love that today I got to see the whole span of your work, and your explanations were excellent. Let's first give Carl a Zoom
Thank
round
you.
of applause. And we do have some time for questions. So you can let's see what's in the chat.
Thank you.
Shannon says the accuracy of the shading makes it look so realistic. Maybe talking about the bottles or the buildings or the people.
Well, I have to, just in response, I would say that, I don't know specifically what painting person is referring to, but generally, when you reduce the image, it becomes more realistic. The details sort of explain each other. The casualness, the mark making is not as apparent. So I don't know exactly which painting it is. But I would mention to keep that in mind. Yeah, and I point out, like, I read many things about Las Meninas, but I always saw it in a book, and it was only like an 8.5 by 11. And I never got it. When I finally saw the painting, I was overwhelmed by it because it's really huge. And to look at it in reduced size, it's a very different painting.
Yeah. I guess it's the same idea too, when we step way back from a
Yes.
painting, our eye blends everything. So it looks more realistic as well. So let's see. Oh, she was referring to the cityscape.
Cityscapes.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
And Rosemary says, extraordinary how they link together the various paintings. Beautiful beach art, beautiful, inspiring.
Thank you, thank you.
It looks like a score of music.
That's something that I think about a lot, and I use the word musicality. The spacing between the forms, it's really not the bottle, but it's the edge of the bottle and the edge of the next bottle, and how, or building or person, like you mentioned, the park. What is the painting again? Sunday in the Park with
George Seurat.
George Seurat, right?
Yeah.
The negative space plays a role
Mhm.
in how the eye moves from one thing to another, and that is something musical. It's
Mhm.
static, but there's a musicalness.
Yeah,
to
well, yeah, we talk about visual rhythm.
Yes.
And it's actual auditory rhythm, but the rhythm is the basis of it is the same: repetition, spacing,
Counterpoint.
pacing. Yeah.
Light, dark,
Mhm.
high, low, intense, soft.
Harmonics of shape and light. Whoops. And shades of color, Rosemary says.
Mhm.
Okay, great. So does anybody have any questions or that you'd like to share while we have the artist here? You can unmute and tell us. Any questions? We'll give you a chance to think.
Joyce, I had sent in a question. Hi, this was fantastically amazing. And I see you go from East Hampton to the city and so I was wondering if, are you more inspired from your life in East Hampton and that area, which is so different than the city, or do you bring back from the city and then you draw it back, and make your home base the Hamptons and then just do it from there? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. And it,
Okay,
and it,
great.
so we okay?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
It's both really. The city, like I mentioned, I was born there, so I have an attraction for it. And there's also a lot of really good art there. I mean, I'm not just talking about great museums, but there's great galleries and contemporary art, things that are happening. And the theater is an inspiration, music is an inspiration. And I have a collection of friends that I went to school with there. But then out here, it's similar in a sense that what there isn't in terms of theater, there is the natural environment, and there's also a lot of artists here, and so it feeds one back and forth into the other. It always has for me. And my work, now that I'm looking back on probably 50 years of painting, I realize that it's very autobiographical. That I've always borrowed from my immediate experience. I've always found something that I wanted to say about something that I experienced, particularly like the reference to the potato eaters,
Mhm.
or the sunsets, or how the sunset culture, or going to restaurants and meeting friends. That's something that it's part of my life, and I paint from that. So
Mhm.
it's really biographical, the inspiration. So it's both East Hampton and New York.
Mhm.
Thank you so much. I'm gonna remember that I borrowed from my immediate experience. That's amazing.
I have a question.
Sure.
What I noticed in this whole presentation is you have a remarkable ability to concentrate on what you're painting. Like whether it's a gesture drawing or all these buildings or these views. Is that something you developed by painting? Or tell us how do you work with the ability to concentrate?
Well, I showed about, I think, 30 paintings or so, maybe more. I don't remember. We counted them, but I forget. But I probably have 300 or 400 paintings. When I was in the World Trade Center, I made at least 50 paintings. 50 paintings, and it was the same view. It was, I may have concentrated on the Hudson River or the East River or Midtown, but basically I was looking at the same view. When I was painting the birds, it was doing birds over and over again. I don't know how many drawings I have of birds,
Mhm.
or terns in particular. The beach paintings, the same thing. I did at least 100 paintings of beach paintings. So it's as much as it is concentration, it's practice.
Mhm.
It's informing myself.
Mhm.
I'll do it and I learn from the mistakes. I mean, it's a very common thing that people say, all creative people, you really learn more from your mistakes.
Mhm.
I make plenty of them. I
Mhm.
make one after another after another. Every single painting I have, I could repaint differently and improve on it.
Absolutely,
I've
yeah.
learned so much. And I mentioned that earlier. That's the real benefit of plein air painting, is that it'll look good while you're making it, and then you reflect on it and you go back to the scene and you realize there's weaknesses in it, or it looks exactly like what you painted, but it isn't really as effective as if you rearrange it, change the color, temperature, composition, whatever.
Mhm.
So it's indulging in that learning experience.
Mhm.
Plein air painting is very much a learning experience, and painting in general is a learning
Yeah,
experience.
the process.
It's a process.
Now, if you don't mind me asking, how often do you get into the studio, or not so much now, but just in general? Because I'm thinking like also if you're painting all the time, it's almost like being warmed up, like when you're Like if I'm going to the gym all the time, it's easier to go to the gym, right?
Yes.
If you stop and then start, then
Yes.
it's like a big deal to get back. And maybe that's a
Yes.
bad metaphor.
No, it's a
But can
very
you
accurate
speak a
thing.
little bit about that?
It's great to paint every day. It's great. Something, and it's more than just getting in and out of it. You know, that it's easier to keep painting if you keep painting. But also something really happens. Your perception changes, your comfort level changes, the muscle memory improves. There's so many things, you know, just the ergonomics of being in the studio. It's important to paint regularly. And also something that's commented on a lot with de Kooning and Leonardo da Vinci.
Mhm.
They spent a lot of time in their studio looking at their paintings. You don't actually spend all your time. If I'm in my studio, say for 4 hours, I may spend only a half an hour of actually painting. The rest of the time I'm looking at it, wondering what I should do next. And there's something else about studio practice. I think it's a very good thing to look at your paintings in a mirror. Like I'll look at my painting in a mirror and I'll make a drawing of the mirror image. And then I'll look at the drawing in the mirror and compare it to the painting. So it's another way of studying and getting out of that sort of hypnotism that you get into by looking at the same thing over and over. And so that whole thing is about learning. It's about training your mind to see, and that builds on it every day, even if you just paint for, you know, a half an hour.
Yeah, no, that's really, really good words of wisdom.
Well, thanks.
No, I'm serious. That
I
was,
had great teachers.
but you're a good teacher,
Well,
even though you're not teaching, but you are, this is very instructive, what you've been, the way you explained everything. So let's see, everybody, we are at the top of the hour. And so we're gonna have to close, but I so thank Carl for.
Thank you, really.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this and to present your amazing work.
Thank
And
you.
really, it inspired me to, and I always tell this to all of our Zoom students, that if you want to learn how to draw, if you want to learn how to paint, draw and paint.
Yeah.
You're not going to do it in 1 hour class. You have to draw all the time, just like
Yes.
what you said. So I'm going to take that advice for
Okay.
myself. Okay.
And thank you, everybody, for
Yeah.
dropping in and supporting the arts.
So thank you so much, Carl.
Thank you.
Have a nice day or evening, everyone.